You have 7 days to leave this property. The words were printed in bold black letters across a red notice taped to the front door just as the first light of dawn touched the quiet neighborhood. Caleb Morgan stood motionless on the small wooden porch, staring at the paper while a cold breeze moved through the trees lining the street. For a long moment, he did not reach for it. He simply looked. Behind that door was everything he had left. A modest 2-bedroom house on the edge of Seattle. Faded paint. A roof that needed repairs. Floors that creaked when the weather changed. To anyone else, it was an ordinary house. To Caleb, it was the last place where memories of his late wife still lived. Inside, 8-year-old Emma was still asleep beneath a blanket covered with tiny stars. Caleb glanced through the window before carefully removing the notice from the door. 7 days. 7 days before the bank took the only home his daughter had ever known. He folded the paper and slipped it into his jacket pocket. Then he opened the door and stepped inside. The smell of coffee filled the kitchen. Caleb moved quietly, preparing breakfast before Emma woke up. Pancakes were out of the question this week. Eggs were gone too. He settled for toast and a sliced apple. When Emma entered the kitchen a few minutes later, rubbing sleep from her eyes, she smiled immediately. "Morning, Dad." Caleb returned the smile. "Morning, kiddo." "Did something happen?" she asked. He paused for half a second. Children noticed more than adults realized. "Just thinking about work." Emma seemed satisfied with the answer. Caleb was grateful. As she ate breakfast and talked about a school project, he listened carefully, nodding at all the right moments while silently calculating bills, deadlines, and impossible numbers in his head. The mortgage payment was overdue. Savings were gone. Extra shifts had disappeared months ago. Yet none of those worries reached his face. Emma deserved one more normal morning. After dropping her off at school, Caleb climbed into his aging pickup truck and headed toward a maintenance job across town. Gray clouds gathered overhead, turning the sky the color of steel. By early afternoon, rain began falling steadily across the city. Traffic slowed. Wind rattled signs and bent tree branches. Caleb had just finished repairing equipment at a commercial property when he noticed a crowd forming near a busy intersection ahead. Most drivers continued moving. Most pedestrians kept walking. Then he saw a woman lying on the wet sidewalk while people stood nearby, unsure what to do. Without hesitation, Caleb pulled over. Rain soaked his jacket as he hurried across the street. The woman appeared unconscious. Her white coat was drenched from the storm. Several bystanders watched nervously. "Has anyone called for help?" Caleb asked. A man nodded. "An ambulance is coming." Caleb knelt beside the woman and stayed with her, speaking calmly even though she could not respond. Minutes passed beneath the cold rain. Sirens finally echoed in the distance. As emergency crews arrived and took over, Caleb stepped back. No one asked his name. He never offered it. He simply glanced once more at the woman before returning to his truck. He was already late for work. As he drove away through the rain, neither he nor anyone else realized that the stranger he had just helped would soon change the course of his life forever. The rain continued long after Caleb drove away from the intersection. Water rolled across the windshield of his aging pickup truck while traffic crawled through the streets of Seattle. His phone buzzed twice with overdue payment reminders. He ignored both messages. There was nothing he could do about them today. He still had another maintenance shift scheduled before sunset and groceries to buy before picking up Emma from school. Life did not pause simply because trouble had arrived. Across the city, the woman Caleb had helped was being admitted to a private hospital. Doctors moved quickly. Nurses checked monitors and reviewed medical information. Several worried people had already gathered in the waiting area. Among them were attorneys, executives, assistants, and security personnel. Everyone seemed anxious. Everyone seemed important. When the woman finally regained consciousness later that evening, relief spread through the room. Her name was Madison Reed, one of the most successful business leaders in the Pacific Northwest. She blinked slowly as hospital lights came into focus above her. A physician offered a reassuring smile. "You are going to be fine." Madison nodded weakly. "What happened?" The doctor explained what little they knew. A medical episode. Rain. A crowded sidewalk. Then a stranger who stopped and stayed with her until help arrived. Madison listened carefully. "Who was he?" she asked. The doctor shook his head. "We do not know." For some reason, that answer bothered her more than anything else. Meanwhile, Caleb arrived at Emma's school just before after-school pickup ended. She climbed into the truck carrying a backpack that looked almost as large as she was. "Did you have a good day?" Caleb asked. Emma smiled. "I got an A on my spelling test." "I knew you would." "Did you have a good day?" she asked. Caleb laughed softly. "I survived it." Emma narrowed her eyes. "That means no." He smiled and started the truck. Children always seem to know the truth. That evening, after dinner, Caleb sat alone at the kitchen table reviewing bills while Emma worked on homework nearby. Numbers covered the page in front of him. Mortgage balance, utility payments, insurance, school expenses. Every calculation ended the same way. He was running out of time. Emma eventually looked up from her workbook. "Dad." "Yes." "Are we okay?" The question settled heavily in the room. Caleb folded one of the bills and set it aside. "We are together, right?" Emma nodded. "Then we are okay." She smiled and returned to her homework. Caleb wished certainty came as easily to adults as it did to children. Across town, Madison could not stop thinking about the stranger who had helped her. Several people had already attempted to identify him. Security teams reviewed reports. Assistants made phone calls. Yet nobody knew his name. The only clue came from a witness who remembered seeing an older pickup truck leaving after emergency crews arrived. Madison stared out her hospital window at the city lights below. Most people in her position were surrounded by people eager to gain something from them. Attention, access, opportunity. Yet the man who had helped her wanted nothing at all. He had not waited for recognition. He had not asked for a reward. He had simply left. As rain tapped softly against the glass, Madison made a quiet decision. She was going to find him. Somewhere beyond the hospital walls, Caleb was putting Emma to bed while wondering how he would save their home. Neither of them knew that their lives had already become connected by a single moment in the rain. The next morning arrived with clear skies for the first time all week. Sunlight stretched across the rooftops of Seattle while Caleb Morgan loaded tools into the back of his pickup truck before heading to work. The weather had improved, but his situation had not. 6 days remained before the foreclosure became final. 6 days before Emma would lose the only home she remembered. Caleb checked his mailbox on the way to the truck. A white envelope waited inside. He already knew what it was before opening it. The final warning from the bank. He folded the letter carefully and placed it in his jacket pocket. Then he started the engine and drove away. Across the city, Madison Reed had been released from the hospital. Her recovery was progressing well, but her attention remained fixed on one question. Who was the man who had helped her? Her assistants continued gathering information. Witness statements, traffic camera footage, emergency response records. Every lead seemed incomplete. Yet one detail appeared repeatedly. An older blue pickup truck leaving shortly after the ambulance arrived. Madison studied a grainy image captured by a traffic camera. The license plate was partially obscured. The driver could not be identified. Most people would have given up. Madison did not. Back at school, Emma spent lunch talking with friends about an upcoming family appreciation event. Parents were invited to attend. Children would share stories about people they admired. Emma already knew who she planned to talk about. Her father. Later that afternoon, Caleb arrived home carrying a small bag of groceries. The contents were simple. Bread, soup, milk. Enough to last several days if they were careful. As he unlocked the front door, he noticed something unusual resting on the porch. A small velvet pouch. He frowned and picked it up. The material felt expensive. Inside was a bracelet decorated with delicate stones that sparkled in the afternoon sunlight. Caleb immediately remembered the woman from the ring. He had noticed something fall near the sidewalk while emergency crews worked, but the moment had passed so quickly he barely thought about it afterward. Apparently, he had picked it up absent-mindedly before leaving and forgotten it inside his truck until finding it that morning beneath the seat. He turned the bracelet over in his hands. It looked valuable, very valuable. Enough to help with overdue bills. Enough to make a difference. For a brief moment, the weight of temptation settled quietly over him. Then he placed the bracelet back into the pouch. Some things were not his to keep. That evening, Emma sat across from him at the dinner table. "What is that?" she asked, pointing toward the pouch. Caleb opened it and showed her the bracelet. Emma's eyes widened. "Wow, it belongs to someone else. Are you going to return it?" Caleb smiled. "Of course." Emma nodded as though no other answer could possibly exist. Sometimes children made the right choice seem effortless. Across town, Madison sat in her office reviewing reports when an assistant entered carrying a folder. "We found something," the assistant said. Madison looked up immediately. "What?" A witness remembered seeing the man pick up an item from the sidewalk before leaving. Madison leaned forward. "An item?" The assistant nodded. "Possibly a bracelet." Madison instinctively touched her wrist. Empty. Her expression changed. The bracelet had been a gift from her late mother. Suddenly, finding the stranger became more important than ever. Neither of them realized it yet, but a forgotten bracelet was about to become the first real thread connecting two very different worlds. 5 days remained. The number echoed quietly in Caleb Morgan's mind as he drove through morning traffic before sunrise. 5 days before the foreclosure became final. 5 days before strangers could walk through the front door and tell him and Emma they no longer belonged there. The thought followed him everywhere now. It sat beside him during work. It waited for him at night. It greeted him each morning before he even opened his eyes. Yet despite everything, life continued demanding his attention. A broken air conditioning unit needed repairs. A leaking pipe needed fixing. Customers expected professionalism regardless of personal problems. Caleb gave them exactly that. Across the city, Madison Reed's search was becoming more serious. What had started as gratitude was slowly turning into determination. Her team had reviewed dozens of leads, interviewed witnesses, and examined security footage from businesses near the intersection where she had collapsed. Finally, one of her investigators arrived with something useful. "We found the truck." Madison looked up immediately. "Are you certain?" The investigator nodded and placed several photographs on her desk. The images showed an older blue pickup parked outside various job sites around Seattle. Nothing about the vehicle seemed remarkable. In fact, it looked like the kind of truck most people would never notice. Madison studied the photographs. "Do we know who owns it?" "Not yet," the investigator replied. "But we are close." For the first time since leaving the hospital, Madison felt genuine hope. Meanwhile, Caleb arrived home that evening carrying the bracelet in his jacket pocket. He had spent several days trying to determine how to return it. The problem was simple. He had no idea who it belonged to. There had been no identification, no contact information, only a beautiful piece of jewelry that clearly meant something important to someone. As he entered the house, Emma was sitting at the kitchen table working on a school project. Colored paper, markers, and photographs were spread across the surface. "What are you making?" Caleb asked. Emma smiled. "A family presentation. Sounds important." "It is." She held up a page covered with pictures. "We have to talk about someone we admire." Caleb looked closer and immediately recognized several photographs of himself. One showed him teaching Emma to ride a bicycle. Another showed them planting flowers beside the house years earlier. His smile faded slightly when he saw that picture. The flowers no longer existed. The garden had slowly disappeared as money became tighter. Emma noticed his expression. "What is wrong?" "Nothing." She tilted her head. "That means something." Caleb laughed softly. "You are getting too smart." Emma grinned. "My teacher says that is a good thing." Later that night, after Emma had gone to bed, Caleb sat alone on the front porch. The neighborhood was quiet. Porch lights glowed softly in the darkness. He pulled the foreclosure notice from his pocket and read it again. Then he looked toward the house. Every room held memories. Birthday parties, Christmas mornings, family dinners, conversations with his wife before illness changed everything. A house was wood, nails, and paint. A home was something entirely different. Across town, Madison sat in her office reviewing new information from the investigation. Then her assistant entered carrying another report. "We found something else," she said. Madison accepted the folder. Inside was a photograph taken by a traffic camera on the day of the incident. For the first time, the image clearly showed the driver stepping out of the blue truck. The picture was grainy, but one detail stood out immediately. The man wore work clothes. Ordinary clothes. The clothes of someone who spent his days helping others instead of sitting behind a desk. Madison stared at the image for several seconds. She still did not know his name, but she knew one thing. The stranger who had saved her life was much closer than either of them realized. 4 days remained. The number no longer felt like a deadline. It felt like a countdown. Every hour seemed louder than the one before. Caleb Morgan woke before sunrise and sat quietly at the kitchen table with a cup of coffee that had long since gone cold. Across from him lay the foreclosure documents, unpaid bills, and a notebook filled with calculations that never produced the answer he needed. The math was simple. No matter how many times he checked it, the result remained the same. There was not enough money. From the hallway came the sound of footsteps. Emma appeared wearing oversized socks and carrying a blanket around her shoulders. "You are up early," Caleb said. "You are too." She sat beside him. For a moment, neither spoke. Then Emma looked at the papers on the table. "Is it about the house?" Caleb froze. The question arrived so softly that it hurt more than any accusation could have. He set down his coffee. "Why would you ask that?" Emma lowered her eyes. "Because you look at those papers every night." Children noticed everything, especially the things adults hoped they would miss. Caleb forced a gentle smile. "I am working on a solution." Emma nodded, but he could see uncertainty in her eyes. Later that day, Madison Reed finally received the breakthrough she had been waiting for. One of her investigators entered her office carrying a folder and a small smile. "We found him." Madison stood immediately. "Are you certain?" "Yes." The investigator handed over several pages. Madison scanned the information quickly. Caleb Morgan, 40 years old, maintenance technician, widower, single father, residential address included. Madison continued reading. Her expression gradually changed. Employment history, volunteer work, community references, school records involving his daughter. The picture that emerged was not one of a hero seeking recognition. It was a man quietly carrying responsibilities most people never saw. Then Madison reached the final page. Her eyes stopped moving. Foreclosure proceedings. Active. Property scheduled for seizure in 4 days. She read the line again to make sure she had not misunderstood it. For days. The same man who had stopped to help a stranger while his own life was falling apart was about to lose his home. Madison slowly closed the folder. Across town, Caleb finished another long shift and stopped at a grocery store before heading home. He moved carefully through the aisles, comparing prices. Every dollar mattered now. He placed a few items into the cart. Bread, pasta, milk, peanut butter. Nothing extra, nothing unnecessary. As he approached the checkout line, he noticed a small display of flowers near the entrance. For a moment he paused. His late wife had loved fresh flowers. Years ago, she would place them on the kitchen table every weekend. Caleb stared at the display for several seconds before quietly continuing toward the register. Some memories were expensive in ways that had nothing to do with money. That evening, Madison sat alone in her penthouse apartment overlooking the city. The lights of Seattle stretched endlessly beyond the glass walls. Yet her attention remained fixed on the file resting beside her. She thought about the rain. She thought about the stranger who stayed when others walked away. Most of all, she thought about the fact that he had never mentioned his own troubles. Not once. He had been facing the loss of everything and still chose compassion. Madison looked at the bracelet now resting safely on a nearby table. The bracelet had led her to Caleb. The file had revealed his struggle. And for the first time since leaving the hospital, she realized this story was no longer about gratitude alone. It was about doing what was right. Somewhere across the city, Caleb was helping Emma finish her homework while believing he was running out of options. He had no idea that someone else was already making plans that could change everything. 3 days remained. The number followed Caleb Morgan everywhere now. It sat beside him while he drove. It echoed through every conversation. It waited for him at the end of each day like a shadow he could not escape. 3 days before the foreclosure. 3 days before he would have to explain to Emma why they could no longer stay in the home filled with memories of her mother. That morning, Caleb made a decision he had been avoiding for weeks. If he could not save the house, perhaps he could at least buy more time. He spent his lunch break meeting with a representative from the bank. The office was clean, quiet, and efficient. Everything about it felt designed to remove emotion from difficult decisions. The representative reviewed his file and listened politely. "I am asking for an extension," Caleb said. "Just a little more time." The woman studied the documents in front of her. "I am sorry, Mr. Morgan. The foreclosure process is already too far along." Caleb nodded slowly. He had expected that answer. "There is nothing else." The representative hesitated. "Not under current terms." Current terms. The phrase lingered in his mind as he left the building. Outside, the afternoon sky was gray once again. Seattle seemed to specialize in clouds whenever life became complicated. Across the city, Madison Reed was having a very different conversation. She sat inside a conference room with attorneys, financial advisors, and senior executives from her company. Several folders were spread across the table. One of them contained Caleb's foreclosure file. "You want to purchase the loan?" one attorney asked. Madison nodded. "Yes." The room fell silent for a moment. Finally, another advisor spoke. "This is highly unusual." Madison smiled faintly. So was a stranger standing in the rain to help someone he did not know. No one argued after that. Meanwhile, Caleb returned home carrying a burden heavier than any tool he had lifted at work. Emma immediately sensed something was wrong. Children often recognized sadness long before adults admitted it existed. During dinner, she pushed her plate aside and looked directly at him. "Dad." "Yes." "If we have to leave, will we still be together?" The question struck deeper than anything the bank had said. Caleb set down his fork and reached across the table. "Emma." She looked up. "No matter what happens, we stay together. Always." Emma nodded slowly. Then she smiled. "That is what I thought." The simplicity of her trust nearly broke his heart. Later that evening, after Emma went to bed, Caleb walked through the house one room at a time. The living room where they watched movies on rainy nights. The hallway where family photographs still hung. The kitchen where his wife once laughed while making pancakes on Saturday mornings. Every corner carried a memory. Every memory carried a piece of someone he still missed. Across town, Madison reviewed the final paperwork required to move forward. Her legal team worked efficiently. Financial arrangements were made. Calls were placed. Documents were prepared. Yet despite the complexity of the process, one thought remained simple. Caleb had helped her when he had every reason to focus only on himself. The least she could do was make sure he had a chance. As midnight approached, the city grew quiet. Caleb sat alone on his porch, staring into the darkness. Inside the house, Emma slept peacefully. Inside a downtown office tower, attorneys continued processing documents that would alter the course of his future. Caleb believed he was running out of options. What he did not know was that somewhere across Seattle, an entirely new possibility had already begun moving toward him. 2 days remained. The reality of it settled over the Morgan household like a heavy winter fog. Caleb woke before dawn and sat quietly on the edge of his bed, listening to the familiar sounds of the house. The hum of the refrigerator, the distant ticking of a hallway clock, the soft wind outside brushing against the siding. Soon, he feared, these ordinary sounds might belong to someone else. He dressed for work and walked into the kitchen where Emma was already awake, pouring cereal into a bowl. She looked up and smiled. "You are early." Caleb smiled back. "So are you." She shrugged. "I could not sleep." Neither could he, but he did not say so. Instead, they shared breakfast beneath the warm glow of the kitchen light, both pretending everything was normal. Across the city, Madison Reed's legal team was moving quickly. Documents passed between offices. Calls were made to lenders. Meetings were scheduled. Every hour mattered. Madison sat at the head of a conference table reviewing the latest update. "The transfer should be completed tomorrow," one attorney explained. "If everything stays on schedule." Madison nodded. "Make sure it does." Her voice was calm, but beneath that calm was determination. She had spent her entire career solving complicated problems. This one felt different. This one mattered personally. Meanwhile, Caleb worked through another long day repairing equipment in office buildings and apartment complexes. He accepted extra tasks whenever possible. Every additional dollar still felt important, even though deep down he knew the numbers no longer added up. During a short break, he checked his voicemail. Another message from the bank. Another reminder of the approaching deadline. He deleted it without listening to the end. Some facts did not become easier through repetition. That afternoon, Emma's school hosted the family appreciation event she had been preparing for. Parents filled the auditorium while children took turns speaking about the people they admired most. Caleb arrived directly from work, still wearing his maintenance uniform. He slipped quietly into a seat near the back. When Emma's turn arrived, she walked onto the stage carrying her project board. She looked nervous at first. Then she spotted her father in the audience. Immediately, she smiled. "The person I admire most is my dad," she began. Caleb lowered his eyes slightly. Around him, parents listened attentively. Emma talked about how her father fixed things when they broke, how he never complained, how he always helped people even when he was tired. Then she said something that made the entire room quiet. "My dad always makes me feel safe, even when I know he is worried." Caleb felt his throat tighten. Emma smiled proudly from the stage. She did not know how much those words meant. She did not know they arrived exactly when he needed them most. Across town, Madison received a call just before sunset. The attorney sounded pleased. The acquisition has been approved. Madison closed her eyes briefly in relief. And the foreclosure? Once the final documents are executed tomorrow, the process can be halted. Tomorrow. The word echoed in her mind. One more day? One more step. That evening, Caleb and Emma sat together on the front porch watching the sky turn shades of orange and gold. Neither spoke for several minutes. Finally, Emma leaned against his shoulder. "I like it here," she said quietly. Caleb looked at the house. The peeling paint. The old porch. The windows glowing warmly from inside. "So do I." As darkness settled over the neighborhood, Caleb believed he was spending one of his final evenings in the home he loved. What he could not see was that only a few miles away, signatures were being placed on documents that would soon rewrite the ending of his story. One day remained. The morning arrived with unusual stillness, as if the city itself were holding its breath. Caleb Morgan stood in the driveway looking at the house, while Emma waited beside him with her backpack. Neither mentioned the date. Neither needed to. The reality of tomorrow sat quietly between them. Caleb forced a smile. "Ready for school?" Emma nodded. "Ready for work?" she asked. Caleb laughed softly. "As ready as I can be." Before leaving, Emma wrapped her arms around him. The gesture lasted only a few seconds, but it stayed with him long after the school bell rang and the workday began. Across the city, Madison Reed was already inside a conference room reviewing the final documents. Attorneys moved through pages carefully. Financial specialists confirmed transfers. Signatures were collected. Every detail mattered. One mistake could delay everything. Madison listened as the lead attorney finished his report. "The foreclosure process can be halted once the final authorization is delivered tomorrow morning." Madison nodded. "Then we make sure it gets delivered." Her voice was calm, but beneath that calm was urgency. She knew time was running short. Meanwhile, Caleb spent the day completing maintenance calls with a focus that surprised even him. Perhaps when people approach the edge of losing something important, they learn to appreciate ordinary moments more deeply. He noticed the sunlight reflecting from office windows. He noticed the smell of fresh coffee from a corner cafe. He noticed the laughter of strangers passing on sidewalks. Small things suddenly felt valuable. Late that afternoon, he returned home carrying a cardboard box. Emma noticed it immediately. "What is that for?" Caleb set it on the kitchen table. "Just organizing a few things." Emma looked at the empty box and then at her father. She was old enough to understand what it meant. The house grew quiet. Together they began sorting through photographs, books, and keepsakes. Some items went into drawers. Others went into boxes. Every object seemed attached to a memory. Emma picked up a framed family photograph taken years earlier. "Mom loved this picture." Caleb smiled. "She did." For a moment, neither spoke. Then Emma carefully placed the frame into the box. As evening approached, there was a knock at the door. Caleb opened it and found a courier holding an envelope. "Mr. Morgan?" Caleb nodded. "Delivery for you." The envelope contained legal paperwork he barely understood. Several pages referenced financial institutions, ownership transfers, and account reviews. None of it made sense. At the bottom was a note requesting his presence at the property the following morning before noon. No explanation. No details. Just a time and location. Caleb read the message twice. Emma looked up from the couch. "What is it?" Caleb shook his head. "I'm not sure." Across town, Madison stood alone beside the window of her office overlooking Seattle. The city lights stretched across the horizon as dusk settled over the skyline. On her desk rested the bracelet that had started everything. Tomorrow, she would finally meet the man who returned it without hesitation and who had helped a stranger while carrying burdens of his own. Tomorrow, Caleb believed he would be facing the final chapter of losing his home. What he did not know was that tomorrow would become the day his entire story changed. The next morning arrived beneath a sky washed clean by overnight rain. Caleb Morgan stood on the front porch holding the envelope he had received the day before. Emma stood beside him, her small hand wrapped around his. Neither of them knew exactly what was coming. A few vehicles were already parked along the street. Two representatives from the bank stood near the sidewalk speaking quietly. Caleb took a slow breath. This was the day he had feared for weeks. Then, just before noon, a line of dark vehicles turned onto the street and approached the house. Neighbors stepped onto their porches. Curtains moved in nearby windows. The entire block seemed to pause. The first vehicle stopped. A woman stepped out wearing an elegant white coat. Caleb recognized her immediately. She was the stranger from the rain. For a moment, neither spoke. Madison Reed smiled gently and walked toward him. "Mr. Morgan." Caleb nodded. "You were the woman I helped." Madison's eyes softened. "And you were the man who saved my life." The neighborhood fell silent. Caleb glanced at the bank representatives and then back at Madison. "I do not understand." "I know," she replied. "That is why I came." One of the attorneys accompanying her stepped forward and handed Caleb a folder. Caleb opened it slowly. Inside were legal documents, transfer agreements, and official notices. The words blurred together at first. Then one sentence captured his attention. "Foreclosure proceedings terminated." He looked up in disbelief. "What is this?" Madison answered quietly. "The foreclosure has been stopped." Caleb stared at her. Emma stared at her. Even the bank representatives seemed unusually respectful. Madison continued. "After I learned who you were, I discovered what was happening. You helped a complete stranger without asking for anything in return. You stayed when others walked away. You showed compassion during one of the hardest moments of your own life." She paused. I could not ignore that. Caleb looked down at the documents again. "I do not know what to say." Madison smiled. "There is more." She reached into her bag and removed the bracelet. The same bracelet Caleb had protected despite his financial struggles. "This belonged to my mother," she said softly. "You could have sold it. You could have kept it. Instead, you tried to find its owner." Caleb shrugged gently. "It was not mine." Madison laughed quietly through gathering emotion. "Exactly." She pointed toward the paperwork in his hands. "The loan has been purchased. The debt has been cleared. The house is yours." For a second, nobody moved. Nobody spoke. Emma looked at her father. "Dad." Caleb's eyes filled with tears he had spent months refusing to show. Emma threw her arms around him. The folder slipped slightly in his hands as he hugged her back. Around them, neighbors watched in complete silence. The bank representatives stood quietly. The attorney stepped back. Even the wind seemed to disappear. Madison looked at the father and daughter standing together on the porch and knew this moment had nothing to do with money. It was about dignity. It was about grace. It was about a man who chose kindness when life gave him every excuse not to. Sunlight broke through the clouds and settled across the old house. Caleb looked at Emma, then at Madison, then at the home he thought he was losing. And for the first time in many months, the future no longer felt like something to fear.